Good morning. You're listening to BizNews Daybreak on Tuesday, the 3rd of March, 2026. I'm Alec Hogg. We're here to cut through the noise and give you clear, actionable business news that you need before the markets open and before you get into your office. Here's what you need to know to make the most of today. Well, as you might have expected, 4 days in, the war in the Middle East remains front and center in the news cycle, with the oil price impacted most obviously. Brent crude, that's the market which influences prices set at South African pumps, is up $10 a barrel since Friday and is now just below $80 a barrel. With the local currency having weakened as well, the oil price in Rand is up 16% since the war started, if it matters to you, from 1,100 Rands per barrel to 1,278 Rand. That doesn't augur well for the price at the pump in a few weeks' time. Remember, petrol prices are actually centrally set here in South Africa. Gold, on the other hand, starts the day in all-time high territory, having gained a couple of percent overnight. It's now at $5,383 an ounce. But the Rand, which usually follows gold, is being influenced more right now by geopolitical developments and begins Tuesday's trade at 16 Rand and 8 cents against the US dollar. Bitcoin seems to be following gold this time. It gained 2% overnight to $68,500. $68,500. Let's kick off with the freshest overnight news from our partners at Bloomberg.
President Trump says the U.S. will keep up its military offensive against Iran for as long as it takes. Speaking publicly for the first time since U.S. and Israeli attacks began on Saturday, Trump outlined his goals for the operation.
Our objectives are clear. First, we're destroying Iran's missile capabilities, and you see that happening on an hourly basis, and their capacity to produce brand new ones, and pretty good ones they make. Second, we're annihilating their navy. We've knocked out already 10 ships. They're at the bottom of the sea. Third, we're ensuring that the world's number one sponsor of terror can never obtain a nuclear weapon.
Now, Trump said the administration planned on a 4 to 5 week long campaign, and he said it's now ahead of schedule. Meantime, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said the hardest hits are yet to come.
The next phase will be even more punishing on Iran than it is right now. Someone was screaming, how long will it take? I don't know how long it'll take. We have objectives. We will do this as long as it takes to achieve those objectives, and we will achieve those objectives. The world will be a safer place when we're done with this operation.
Earlier, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said the campaign will not lead the U.S. into an endless war.
And so President Trump ensures that our enemies understand we'll go as far as we need to go to advance American interests. But we're not dumb about it. You don't have to roll 200,000 people in there and stay for 20 years.
Now, so far, 6 U.S. service members have been killed in this action, and Trump said there will likely be more casualties. But he insisted the operation will ensure U.S. security well into the future. The U.S. Embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, was attacked by 2 suspected Iranian drones. The Saudi Defense Ministry says an explosion occurred, followed by a fire. No injuries or casualties have been reported. Afterwards, the U.S. mission to Saudi Arabia issued a shelter-in-place notification for Jeddah, Riyadh, and Tehran. Meantime, Israel says it has completed a wave of strikes targeting the command centers in Tehran. In a message on Telegram, the IDF said its Air Force targeted the headquarters, bases, and regional command centers of Iran's internal security bodies. Crude oil rallied after shipping through the Strait of Hormuz came to a near standstill. Now, roughly 20% of global oil exports pass through this narrow waterway. Late in the day, an advisor to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard said Iranian forces will set fire to any ship attempting to pass through the strait. The quote was, "We won't allow a single drop of oil to leave the region." We got reaction from Bob McNally of Rapidan Energy Advisors.
I think there's a real risk, and our base case would be that this will last more like weeks. We're thinking 15 days as sort of our new base case, with more or less Hormuz pretty much closed. And if that turns out to be correct, then we have a lot higher to go in both oil, refined product, and even natural gas prices.
Bob McNally there from Rapidan Energy Advisors. Qatar, meantime, has shut down its LNG production at the world's largest export facility after being targeted in an Iranian drone attack. Separately, we are being told the UAE and Qatar privately lobbied allies to persuade President Trump to keep operations against Iran short. JPMorgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon says there is more optimism in the market than there should be, given all the risk. Dimon also thinks the probabilities of something going south are more than other people think. And he said inflation will cause an economic downturn.
Asset prices are kind of high, credit spreads are kind of low. There's kind of a lot of complacency in the market. I'm not sure. We look at risk. We look at the broad range of outcomes, and there are negative outcomes, but one of them would be inflation. I call that's the skunk at the party.
That is JPMorgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon speaking earlier to Bloomberg.
Well, there were some big reverses on the JSE yesterday, with one of our favorite stocks, copper play Orion Minerals, dropping 10%. Purple Capital lost 6%, and the banking stocks were also under pressure. Big shock on Wall Street, though, was some pretty awful quarterlies from Berkshire Hathaway. And this in Warren Buffett's final quarter at the helm. Remember, the grand old man, the Oracle of Omaha, has now retired. The stock fell 5% on the numbers, most unusual for a very solid company and usually a very solid share price. Here's how the team at Bloomberg's Stock Movers saw it.
I want to start with Berkshire Hathaway because I think this would have been the big news if we didn't see the big geopolitical crisis that happened over the weekend. But usually
it really got buried.
Yes. And usually this is a big thing and it happens over the weekend and you log in on Monday and you're excited. Well, the stock is now down 4%, leading the losses among a gauge of financial stocks. So the company's operating profits fell nearly 30% in Warren Buffett's last quarter as CEO. So that's really a big move. Analysts note the weakness in the company's insurance business. So again, when I look at Berkshire Hathaway, it's not like I cover it closely, but I look at it enough. Yeah. And it's such a cultural thing, And then the CEO, Greg Abel, he promised to keep Buffett's guiding principles. He started his letter saying that Buffett is a hard act to follow. So I thought that was a nice nod because it's almost synonymous with a company. You just really can't ignore it. I feel like almost everyone knows Warren Buffett, Greg Abel, maybe just a few small circles, but then hopefully he will grow in prominence. But Bloomberg Intelligence said that the capital generation of Berkshire should remain strong given inelastic demand, although they acknowledge headwinds will exist. Vital Knowledge did acknowledge the large drop in the fourth quarter operating income and said that, maybe that's why we're seeing investors a little jittery.
But a reminder that Greg Abel has been there for a while.
That's exactly right, yes.
And so, certainly as Warren Buffett started to think about, his succession and what happens next, people who were brought into the company or part of the company there for a while, right? To understand the culture, he's a new face in terms of investing.
Yes, he's a new face to the public, but not the company.
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly.
But we'll see. Maybe he will also lead a company for 6 decades like Warren Buffett.
The crisis in Iran has reached a critical and bloody stage following recent uprisings that left tens of thousands dead. And in a deeply passionate interview, Dr. Iraj Abedian, who is our go-to man when it comes to Iran, and we've been talking to him for a few months on the subject now, he yesterday condemned the South African government's alignment with the Iranian regime, calling it an endorsement of a dictatorship that has repeatedly failed its own people. Now, Iraj was born and bred in Iran. He has many friends there and many Iranian friends here in South Africa, and he's pretty tapped in with what's happening. He didn't hold back in his assessment of the regime's actions, calling out what he called butchering of at least 30,000 Iranian youth. Here's a powerful clip from the conversation I had with Dr. Abedian yesterday, where he calls on the South African government to change its stance. You can hear the full interview on the director's cut on BizNews Radio. Here's a taster.
There are evidences, there are videos, there are doctor testimonies, there are burial site testimonies. These are regime's people who say, yes, we saw people handcuffed. and bullet in their heads. Nurses, doctors saying people were dragged out of ICU and emergency units whilst they are still connected to medication and they are in body bags. Now, is that so difficult for Department of Foreign Affairs or for the president or for the cabinet say, this is not what we want to align ourselves with. This is not our moral, constitutional foundation on which we want to govern, nor is it the United Nations that we have been party to founding it, can and should turn a blind eye to these things. Why is it so difficult? Why is it so complicated that even our media, Alec, I must also express my disappointment at the media. We've had such a little, other than your business news, really very little analysis of it, very little discourse around a massacre in 21st century. This really baffles me to no end. So don't ask me to explain, Alec.
South Africa's options now, given that we are quite exposed on pretty much everything here, from the reaction with Iran to even sponsoring Iran to come into BRICS. What would the options be if you were sitting in Pretoria and the ANC said, "Oh, we seem to have got this wrong"? Dr. Abedian, what do we do?
Very simple. I do not know, Alec, who will be the next government of Iran. I do not know whether there will be right, left, center, nationalist, kingdom, constitutional democracy, Republican, whatever it be. I can state without fear of contradiction that this will not go down with them. The same way what happened in Syria. Syria is emphatically condemning and has condemned already the Iranian behavior over the past 2 months. It has aligned itself. Remember, Syria is a Middle Eastern neighbor, Syria that Iran spent billions of Iranian capital, so-called as an ally in axis of resistance. Now the Syrian nation is an Islamic nation. It's in the region. They have condemned the Iranian regime's behavior. Now, they are refused to have relationship with them. Now, when the future government comes in, the South African government cannot and should not expect that people will forget what role they have played in legitimizing a regime that has turned out to be very close, if not worse than Hitler. It's a massacre, it's a human tragedy, it's a political misjudgment, despite massive documented evidence. The Iranian nation will not forget. And my advice, therefore, to government would be, the sooner you cut your losses, the more profit you make. Accept, issue a statement, say, this was a misjudgment. They should not have, in the last days, aligned themselves with a dictatorship, a religious dictatorship that has weaponized religion. That's the reality of it. It's not even a particular religion, it's a particular interpretation of Islam. They have weaponized it, and out of miscalculation, misjudgment, ignorance, or whatever, the government has decided to align itself. And the sooner we retract that, the sooner we align ourselves, our values. I'm not talking about war. I'm talking about our values, to put it behind in sympathy and in support of the Iranian nations who have been brutalized and massacred in daylight.
Good news from Southern Africa. BizNews partner DCC Hotel Group showcases world-class hospitality across the region. We spotlight more than 100 carefully selected lodges supporting tourism, local communities, and conservation. Here in Hermanus, whale watching and coastal charm await. Your home for the BizNews Conference 2026.
Back on the local front, business group Sakelige has scored a major victory against the government's controversial National Health Insurance, or NHI, plan. It secured a High Court order that halts the implementation for now. But for the private medical sector, the fight is far from over. In an interview yesterday with my colleague Chris Steyn, Sarkalicha's chief executive Piet Leroux issued a stark warning to healthcare businesses about the dangers of government co-option. Here's a powerful clip from that conversation where Leroux explains why the best defense for private businesses is a strategy of maximum appropriate non-cooperation. He'll be talking on the same theme at the BizNews conference. He's part of an incredibly powerful lineup on the first day, which includes a special guest who will only be unveiled at the event itself. But the full 3 days are going to be providing critical information to the BizNews tribe, and that's why we have upped the capacity. We've added another 50 tickets for latecomers, so you can still get your ticket to the BizNews conference. Just go onto biznews.com. You'll see at the top of the page is an image which talks about BNC 8. Click on that. You'll get all the details, and you'll be able to book and grab one of those 50 tickets. I really urge you to come. Of course, we will be recording everything, but that only gets, trickled out over the next month. So much better to be there, talk to the speakers, rub shoulders with them and with other members of the tribe, and you will return home far better informed, and I'm sure your portfolio will be better set for the future. But let's go back to Piet Leroux and what he said yesterday to Chris.
Our view at Sarkalicha is that NHI is nowhere near implementation, and that people do not have to make big strategic decisions as if the NHI is anywhere near implementation.
So meanwhile, what advice do you have for healthcare businesses as a result of this development?
I think at Sarkalicha we like the term state-proofing or maximum appropriate non-cooperation, where the state seeks to co-opt private businesses, private medical providers, non-profit or for-profit, any non-state actor, where the state seeks to co-opt you into an ideological scheme that is clearly harmful, clearly unacceptable. Offer the least possible cooperation you can. Do this judiciously, of course. There are sometimes risks in not cooperating with the state, but wherever unethical demands that are harmful to society, that are unlawful, that are unconstitutional are made, I think it's also an ethical duty on people to offer the least possible cooperation. That's the one point of advice. And I think the more people resist participation in unlawful and harmful government prescriptions, the better it is for society and the better it is for a flourishing future for all of us in this country.
Would you say this is a prime example of how public interest litigation is the best way to fight harmful policy?
Well, there are many ways, but this is one of the good ways. Public interest litigation by Sarkalicha and the other parties in this litigation has certainly forestalled the implementation of the NHI and is, I think, very encouraging. So public interest litigation is very helpful. This is a good example of it. In other ways, Sarkalicha and in other areas of law, for example, on BEE, on procurement, on Eskom's cuts of power to paying customers just because the municipality didn't pay. On all of those cases where we've also achieved good court victories, we have decreased the harms that would have been affected on businesses and on society and on communities, local and nationally. And so I think this is a good example. Litigation is not the solution to all problems in a country, and especially not in a country like ours, where the state fails at so much and harmfully intervenes in so many other areas, where its ambitions are so far beyond what is good and so far beyond what it is capable of achieving. In a country such as us, it is still encouraging that the courts offer good remedies in specific domains of law and in specific kinds of disputes. And I think it's very important over the next few years to make full use of this relatively functional domain of the state apparatus.
Well, back to the story of the moment as we close off with two pieces on that issue. First, on the ground take from our partners at the Financial Times. Here's FT News Briefing host Victoria Craig talking to two of her colleagues, including the FT's former South African correspondent and now Middle East editor, so he's their main man in the place where the action is, Andrew England. And Andrew suggests the Iranian regime is in for a battle for survival. England also raises questions about Iran's long-term sustainability as the US and Israel continue to launch heavy bombardments. Let's have a listen.
The strikes on Iran and Tehran's counterattacks will have widespread ramifications across the Middle East and reverberate around the world. I'm joined now by Andrew England, our Middle East editor. Hi, Andrew.
Hi.
And I'm also joined by Abigail Hauslohner, the FT's U.S. Foreign Affairs correspondent. Hi to you, Abby.
Hi, Victoria.
So, Andrew, I want to start with you. President Trump has strongly hinted that he wants regime change in Iran. Do we know yet what that looks like?
I think he's looking for disillusioned Iranians to rise up and exploit this chaos. The problem is no one knows what regime change would look like. There's no organized, structured opposition inside Tehran. There's no organized, structured opposition outside Tehran. We don't know how far Trump, if he does want to see regime change, what's he willing to do? Most people think it could only happen if there were boots on the ground. And the sense is that Trump wouldn't put boots on the ground. The regime is weakened, but it's still resilient. Since Khamenei's death on Saturday morning, it's continued to fire missiles and drones across the region. It's got the Revolutionary Guards of about 180,000 troops, which is ideologically loyal to the regime. And it has ideological base. It's weakened, it's wounded, it's at its most vulnerable in decades, but nobody yet is predicting that it's about to implode.
Abby, I want to bring you into this conversation because U.S. President Donald Trump, late on Sunday, said the military campaign against Iran is ongoing, and he vowed that it would, quote, continue until all of our objectives are achieved. Here he is speaking on a video posted to his social media network.
I call upon all Iranian patriots who yearn for freedom to seize this moment, to be brave, be bold, be heroic, and take back your country. America is with you. I made a promise to you, and I fulfilled that promise. The rest will be up to you, but we'll be there to help.
So, Abby, for a lot of people listening, they're going to be wondering, what is the president's plan from here? Do we know?
Well, Trump hasn't provided much in the way of details. It sounds like he is saying, I'm going to take out the regime, and then you, Iranian people, come and make what you will of that and start a new government. His surrogates on Capitol Hill have said that he has no intention of sending U.S. troops into Iran. That makes a regime change, and particularly some sort of orderly transition, really, really challenging. If he has a plan, he hasn't revealed it. And so his critics are saying that this could get really, really messy.
Yeah, on terms of this question about longevity, Andrew, we've seen Iran attack its own allies in the region, and it got a sharp rebuke on Sunday from the UAE. What does a prolonged conflict mean for the region and regional stability going forward?
Iran has a tense relationship with most of the countries in the region. They have been seeking to de-escalate over recent years, both the Arab states and Iran. But what we've seen is that Iran clearly sees it faces an existential moment. It's in a battle for its very survival. Iran's calculation is to survive and to endure and to ensure that the US feels the cost, the global economy feels the cost. But from Iran's perspective, it only needs to get, one missile through, two missiles through to cause damage, to cause fear, to cause disruption. And that's how it calculates its successes. Now, the question is how long it can sustain this when it's being bombed so heavily by the US and Israel.
We close off today's Daybreak with an outlook for the stock market and some very interesting uber truths from Michael Kontopoulos. He's with Richard Bernstein Advisors, and he's in conversation here with Carol Mazar at the Bloomberg Business Week podcast.
The word of the day is uncertainty. Uncertainty has really been a staple, I think, for the last 18 months or so. is going to continue to be a staple. I think gold is reflecting that and has reflected that over the last, year and a half. Wars in general never really are disinflationary or deflationary. I think the bond market is picking up on that at the moment, whether that be because of the obvious oil and natural gas disruptions, or whether it be more due to supply chain issues. It's hard to make a case how what we saw over the weekend is going to lead to deflation or disinflationary forces. And
especially going into it, there were inflationary concerns.
Well, that's the thing, is that, I think even without what was going on with Iran, you've been seeing inflation start to tick up pretty meaningfully. Remember, core PCE is what the Fed cares about. And core PCE bottomed in April of last year. You look at, ISM input prices today, you look at the PPI data, it's all suggestive of higher inflation, not lower inflation. And so this just adds another wrinkle to that, which I think the bond market is getting right? You started off with the flight to quality and lower yields, and that quickly reversed course, and now you're seeing higher yields, and I think that's the right reaction.
What are the major risks?
Rich Bernstein, of course, the founder of RBA, wrote an interesting report several years ago about what sort of are the makeups of a bubble. One of the key makeups of a bubble is democratization of markets. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Just like, the gamification of trading has been.
It feels like there's a lot of money to put to work, and they're searching for more markets to put it to work. And
it's a good way of saying
that makes me a little nervous.
Yeah, I think you mentioned Lloyd Blankfein earlier. He had a good quote about this, and how many of his peers out there have made substantial sums of money doing what they're doing, and now they're trying to even grow that more. And what's the real need for that? Those are Lloyd's names, words, not my own. But I do think that is an interesting point. But listen, I mean, this is an industry. The asset management industry is one where you get paid to grow assets and perform, right? We focus on the performance side and let the asset growth take care of itself. But it's hard. It's easy to see how those can get those objectives can get muddled.
Interesting insights, isn't it? Warren Buffett has often warned about the helpers and the super helpers and the people who actually take away from the system rather than adding to it. And it seems as though he's no longer a lone voice in the wilderness. When you hear on a podcast like Bloomberg from a top asset manager saying, hang on guys, how much more do you really need to have? Well, thank you for joining us for today's BizNews Daybreak. To stay ahead of the curve and read more from our expert contributors, make sure that you visit biznews.com. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and share it with your network. I'm Alec Hogg, wishing you a prosperous day. We'll be back tomorrow.